Hi, I'm Scott Hansel, and this is another episode of Hansel Minutes. Today I'm chatting with Maggie Appleton. She sits at the intersection of design, anthropology, and programming, which is three things that I think are fantastic. And she's the lead design engineer at Normally, a research and design studio. How are you?
I'm really good. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for hanging out. So you've got such a lovely website at maggieappleton.com. You've got blogs, you've got notes, you've got essays, you've got long-form narrative writing, and it is opinionated, and I love that. But your opinions are based in a kind of, like you said, an intersection of anthropology and design and programming. You're not just a person on the internet with opinions. How do you form these ideas around how you think things should be around UX or visual interface?
That's a very good question. Maybe that I'm hoping I don't go too deep or like ramble too much on it, because I'm thinking I do try to base everything in anthropology. We were just chatting before that I went to school near where you live, Whitman College in Washington State, and I studied cultural anthropology there, and it was so wonderful. I mean, let's say it was not employable the day after I graduated, like my lot, and I had no career guidance, so they're not winning points for that. But my professors there gave me such a good theoretical grounding in cultural anthropology and how to think about society and culture, and just, I would say, look at the world from a very interesting lens and give me lots of interesting tools to kind of pull on and interesting thinkers. So I had this really strong grounding that I've tried to keep up with over the years. I briefly went back for a master's degree, but COVID cut it off in digital anthropology. But I still love that as a foundation for how to think about things. But I also love the level of applying it to the real world of, I'm very immersed in the web development world, as you are. That's kind of the place I live and breathe. All my friends are developers. That's the only people I really talk to. So I try to look at all the issues or themes that we deal with in our web development jobs through the lens of cultural anthropology, which turns out to be, I guess, a thing not many other people do. So it fills a good niche.
Yeah, and I think it is a useful thing to call out what anthropology is for those who may have forgotten, right? It's the study of humanity, but it thinks about culture, society, linguistics, biology, all of these things. Because when I think of a UX person as a developer myself, it seems like they're the person that knows why the button goes over there. But you're thinking about, like, why do we as humans want the button over there? Like, what is the animus behind that? Like, why this goes on the right and that goes on the left? There's a whole conversation there that's more than just it looks better on the right.
Yes, yeah. Cultural anthropology is a very weird discipline and kind of, niche and maybe not growing that well. I'll say they're not very good at self-promotion as a discipline. Not very popular and hard to define. But yes, they're a mix between like practical on the ground research, like genuinely spending time with people, often years or months if you're doing ethnographic work, and trying to sort of see the invisible rules that govern how people behave in their societies, and then mixing that with philosophy. So also trying to ask meaningful questions, not just saying, okay, why do developers sort of use certain language and why do they act certain ways, but what does that tell us about the world and how we should live our lives? Like, there's definitely a philosophical element to it, hence not being super employable, but being very good for writing long form content.
Yeah. And you've been thinking about this stuff at depth. On some of your articles, you say how many years ago they were done. Like, I just read an article that you did called "The Dark Forest in Generative AI." It could have been written last week, and I read it with the lens of having I'm currently in the present, and I'm thinking about last week, and I'm like, oh, she wrote this 2 years ago. It's very prescient. Do you find
Yeah.
yourself in that situation a lot?
Yeah, I guess I don't know how. I couldn't explain to someone. I think sometimes people message me and they go, how do you sort of have insights ahead of time? Not that I'm really over here, predicting anything useful like the stock market, but there are certain things that I think I've been quite early to. Like, I will say I'm not a big fan of Web3, but I got really interested in the concept of Web3 when I first came across Protocols Labs work in 2018, which at the time isn't that early, but was early for the Web3 movement. And luckily I got out of it, or was like not affiliated with it by the time it became NFTs and a whole bunch of other stuff. But the same happened for language models and AI. I joined my old company, Elicit, in mid 2020, but I started talking, no, not mid 2020, mid 2022. Years are strange at this point. But I started looking at language models in late 2021. So this is like GPT-3. ChatGPT went viral a year later, to give some like timeline context. But I joined this company and got really up to speed on language models and like the theory of AGI and a lot of AI safety work about 9 months before the rest of the world had this huge explosion of interest when ChatGPT came out. So for some reason, I've been able to get interested in things before other people, before they kind of hit critical mass of popularity, which has been a bit of an advantage in writing.
Yeah. This is going to be an extended analogy, but you, at the beginning, before we started recording, we have the little chat back and forth, and you mentioned that you went to school in the Northwest, and I said, "Oh, I'm from Portland," and you're like, "Oh, I love Portland. Portland's this weird little town." Portland is the cozy web. It's the weird. Everyone's like, "Make Portland weird again." It's like Austin. Like there's self-identifying weird sections of the U.S. and little weird towns. And the cozy web is this fun little place where niche people do weird stuff, and they're just goofy and weird. And people have been saying amongst my generation, I'm a Gen X, make the web weird again. Like, where's Tumblr? Where's GeoCities? And you have called out, and others have said, that the dark forest is this part of the web that is eerily devoid of human life. It's this sense of like, eh, like I don't know how to spell that, but like, it's just this quiet, eerie place, and it feels like AI is going to create a big, dark, sad, empty, algorithmic section of the internet, and that makes me sad as a Portlander.
Yeah, that's a good point. That I think that analogy fits. That Portland is the cozy web. It is very just strange. The whole Northwest. That's kind of why I love it. I wish London had a little more of that weirdness. Frankly, they're a bit more traditionalist British. But this theory around the dark web was, and I mean, again, I had given this talk. Oh God, I have to think of years. Again, it must have been 2 years ago. I gave this talk on the expanding dark forest and generative AI, just because I had started working in this AI startup and seeing what was possible. I can't tell you how it came to me. It's just sort of like, I think my ideas build up very slowly over time. I see lots and lots of evidence fly by me on what, used to be Twitter, now Blue Sky, and on blogs and on Hacker News. And I read a lot, and slowly you get these things of like, oh, I'm so sure that we're just about to get this flood of AI generated content. And then, I have some frameworks that I was taught from cultural anthropology and from certain ways of thinking, like design futures and what do we call it, speculative design, about how to sort of think about the repercussions or follow-on implications of certain things you're seeing. And one of the things I thought through just quite extensively was like, okay, let's say there's a web where the vast majority of content is made not by what we used to know as bots, but by much more sophisticated AI agents who have very particular goals they've been set by humans, like promote this product or make it seem like this idea is popular among people or make this political candidate popular. What happens when that works at scale? What happens when you are able to release 1 million AI agents to cover Pinterest and Twitter and LinkedIn with all of this fake, but, very convincing human-like content, and then just kind of think through interesting implications of that. So that was what that whole talk was.
Yeah. It has me thinking about how I feel about existence and how I feel about moving around, and how I am on, even when I'm in a digital walled garden, like Instagram as an example, the things I end up following are cozy things. Like one of the things I'm excited about now is Meet Cutes New York and Meet Cutes London, where this gentleman says, "Are you a couple? Would you mind telling us the story about how you met?" And then it basically takes all these people who are effectively NPCs, like the non-player characters of the people that you pass, and then it humanizes them in a moment. And you go, wow, that couple that just walked by has a really interesting story. The thing that makes me sad about these large language models that, this is a quote, can instantly generate coherent swaths of human-like text, is that they are able to create NPCs, which make what should be a very excited, dense world of people of whom everyone has a backstory into just a bunch of, like, I don't know, kind of Elden Ring what is Elder Scrolls kind of like NPCs, like these aren't real
Yeah.
people, which is a very lonely feeling. You're surrounded, but also lonely, and that's what the web is starting to feel like.
Yeah, it's genuinely happening now. Again, like as I said, it was sort of I had this, thought experiment. What if this happens? And then the sad thing is I've done that same conference talk, I think 5 or 6 times since I first gave it over 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And now when I update the talk every time, I'm just adding all this evidence to it. The first time I gave it, I had theories and no evidence whatsoever to back them up. I couldn't find a single like generated AI post on LinkedIn or Twitter at the time. It wasn't happening. And now half the talk is just like horrifying AI gen photos from Facebook, with like thousands of AI comments on them. So it was
Yeah.
kind of awful to have that proved correct.
Yeah, it is. It is prescient. You said we are about to drown in a sea of pedestrian takes. Everything is just mid.
Yeah.
Everything kind of sucks.
Yeah. And it really matters. I don't know if you felt this when, or even listeners might have, that when you come across a whole slew of Twitter comments or LinkedIn posts that you can just tell Chat GPT wrote them, you just get this lonely sense, this empty sense. Like I was trying to look up, interior design stuff on Pinterest earlier because I have no interior design sense, but I have to decorate a house or something. And over half the images were AI generated. You just know the vibe of them. And you're like, okay, listen, I really need to understand like physical materials, texture, light to like make a room feel nice. And all I've got are fake images of non-places that are not grounded in the real world. So this is all useless to me.
This is not a technical problem, though.
Mm.
Everything that we've talked about is all people problems.
Mm.
How do we solve that? Because right now I'm seeing in all companies, not just the one that I work for in my day job, um, a laziness as we apply AI to things where it's just Copilot for blank, text box over thing. And that seems like the lazy, maybe too crisp of a word, but it's the simplest possible thing is to put a text box over there and have it fill up the whole right side, and it'll be a Copilot for the thing.
Yeah. So this gets into, I know, the motivations and incentives for why people build certain kinds of products. So at the moment, I think there's a lot of easy money to be made by building Copilot or chatbot style things on top of, insert domain or insert problem here. That won't last forever though. I think chatbots, I mean, we could get into it. It's like they are fairly good, low barrier to entry interfaces to most things. Like if you want to do a really generic task like search the web, a chatbot might actually be, I don't think it's the optimal interface, but it will do an okay job of it. And I think a chatbot will do a sort of okay job of a large range of tasks that you might want to do on a computer. But that definitely doesn't mean that it is the optimal interface for any one of those tasks. There's almost always a kind of interface or a kind of visual presentation that's going to be a much better fit, that will be much more effective in getting the person to do the task, that will give them more information, that will be a richer, more dynamic experience. But that takes effort to figure out what that specific interface is. And that's just classic interface interaction UX design work that I think for a moment, a lot of people got quite excited that we could ditch that. They were like, oh, great. We don't have to do all that work anymore. We don't have to do all that user research. We don't have to do all that domain research. We don't have to understand the user needs. We don't have to think through how to display complex information in dense ways. We just are going to put a chatbot on it. And that was a theory for a year or so. And I think people are starting to realize that theory is untrue.
When the web first started, right in the moment when JavaScript started being used for text box validation, we would run around and teach this stuff to people. This is in the mid 90s, early 90s. And we'd say, don't trust user input.
Mm.
And we build these amazing forms, just text boxes over data, deep text boxes over data. And now it's one text box. And apparently we're supposed to just trust it and all
Right.
the users that type into it. It just
Right.
seems
And
the
use it,
irony is thick.
yeah, for every task in the world. Like you want to make an image, like where you would traditionally paint, do sketches and like lay out the composition of it and think about lighting and think about flow and structure and color. You no longer do that. You just type into a box, right? You no longer need to control where objects are in the scene or what color things are. Just, Midjourney will generate it. Or like, oh, you want to run a scientific experiment here, just type into the box. And it's like, okay, sure. Again, for something like I have a single question with a single answer that Wikipedia could answer, that is maybe a decent use case. But for almost every other, I will say, serious, complex human task that needs to be done in the world, the kinds of things that we're being promised AI will actually help with, like it's going to solve medicine and healthcare and, public infrastructure, and it's going to solve climate change. And you think, well, all of those are extremely complex, specific, expert driven stuff. There is absolutely no reason to believe a chatbot will serve the needs of the people who are doing those jobs.
Exactly. So then people who cannot express themselves clearly, and we all know we're in a podcast, extemporaneous speech is difficult. Why do we think that the lack of clarity that they're able to express off the top of their head is going to turn into a great SQL query or a really solid, DOM? This is where everything is perfectly fine. Like they love to show you a demo where like, look, I wrote Pong in React by just asking for it, but they forget that there's 20,000 example Pongs out there, and it just kind of cribbed, it kind of cheated. This is kind of tough in a world where everyone is recommending recommending the book Deep Work. Everyone's like, you should read Deep Work, Deep Work. We're asking people to do the least.
Yeah, yeah. I think this is a thing. I'm trying to figure out something to write about this or do a talk on as like an upcoming piece. And it's something around this thing of complex work is really what I wish more people would be focused on. I'm also part of this community called Tools for Thought that as a philosophical dream is a really good idea. Like, how do we build better tools that help humans think better kinds of thoughts? Which sounds very vague. But in recent years has become very affiliated with sort of note-taking apps like Obsidian or Logseek, or Rome Research was a very popular one, that tried to help people see connections between ideas and organize information, and all like, very noble goals, like good philosophical goals, but ended up sort of being fancy text editors in the end. And now that we're sort of at a moment where this dream of tools for thought, I wish people would be more ambitious with it and think about, well, genuinely, if you're going to say, what kinds of tools would make humans think more important, complex, higher level kinds of thought, you have to move beyond text editors and think really about cognitive science and anthropology. And if we're going to say that AI really is this great thinking tool, this great cognitive aid for all of us, I want people to be a bit more ambitious and take more seriously what kind of work you would need to do to apply that to real problems that are not just organizing text on a page.
Yeah, I like that term cognitive aid. I'm very aspirational and very optimistic, almost like toxically positive. And I feel like I was promised the Star Trek The Next Generation future.
Mm.
And like when I got an iPad, I'm like, look, it's like a pad, like Captain Picard had one, and now I have one. And when I want to talk to a computer, I want to be like Scotty in Star Trek 4, which I saw at the theater in 1984, when he picks up the mouse and he goes, computer, and thought he was going to have a whole conversation with the computer. And they said, just use the keyboard and the mouse. And he's like, oh, how quaint. But in Star Trek Discovery, and they vibe, they brainstorm. It's a partner. It's a rubber duck. Is rubber ducking a reasonable thing to do with an LLM, given that I'm just talking to myself? Like I'm not really talking to an entity.
Yeah, this is my favorite use case for it, or the thing that I argue should be the primary use for it in its current state. And again, this is one of those, like, I'm not saying I was that early to this, but I have this unpublished post from 3 years ago called Language Models Are Rubber Ducks that I never published because I don't know what happened. It just like never made it
No,
through editing. And now I'm like,
great
oh,
minds. You got
so
to do it.
stupid that
Just
that I
just
never
post
published
it.
it. I
Post
know
the
now it's
post.
still relevant. But the argument was everyone's trying to treat them as an oracle, but instead they should be a rubber duck because that is their best use case right now. And this was even back when we were using GPT-3, but it's still true today, I feel, where they are amazing thought partners to just, this is the primary way I use them, it sounds like you do too, is just bouncing ideas off them. I'm like, hey, I'm trying to work through this problem. I don't think it has the answer for me at all. I think I have the answer, but I have to figure out how to get to that answer. And I need someone to talk it through with and prompt me and ask me questions. And it's great for that. That is, for me, is how I think is the most responsible and useful use case for it at the moment.
Hey, friends, for the next couple of episodes, while I learn more about AI, in the middle of the show, I'm going to chat with Leendert van Doorn from Qualcomm and look at some of the great work that they're doing over there. I've got a Snapdragon based Copilot PC right now, and the battery life is like it's the battery life that they always promised me. How is that possible? What changes were made to make the battery life so good?
Yeah. So first of all, you're absolutely right, right? If I look at the Dell XPS, I think it's 19 hours. HP's OmniBook, I think, has 26 hours. It's absolutely amazing. Basically, it's the old day compute that we've all been going for. Uh, the way we're getting there is, first of all, a very efficient CPU, right? So we have a CPU that gives you phenomenal power, right? So it makes it a very snappy platform, but it also does that at very, very efficiently. The other part of it, too, we have lots of dedicated accelerators, including the NPU, which is a dedicated AI accelerator. It just runs the AI inference algorithms, and it does that better and more power efficient than anybody else. Right? So it's a combination of these two things. It's a very efficient CPU and then a heterogeneous accelerator strategy, which includes an AI, machine learning accelerator. That is absolutely top notch.
Wow, that's so cool. It's really happening. The move to a new instruction set architecture is seeing some really extraordinary improvements. I'm really enjoying my Copilot PC. Folks can learn a lot more at qualcomm.com/developer if you want to build your software for this great new platform. I love that you said right now and at the moment three
Mm-hmm.
times in that speech in that moment because you're being conscious and focused on like this is the state of affairs, this is the state of the tech. Maybe tomorrow will be different, maybe 5 years ago was different, but at the moment they are extraordinarily good rubber ducks, and you're couching that yeah, for now. And I love that it's good that you did that. Is that conscious?
Yes. Yeah. I think I did. I learned a good amount of context about the current state of like AI capabilities and where we might be able to take them by working for this company Elicit previously, where the founders had been involved in researching language models for 10 years, way ahead of the curve kind of thing. And I was very useful talking to them about what they think is going to be possible soon. They were very much on the side of like, we're all going to have AGI in 5 years, which is not the camp I'm in for sure. Like, I'm definitely quite skeptical of only text based tools getting us to any sort of human like intelligence, just because I've studied enough embodied cognition and cognitive science to be like, our bodies in physical space are incredibly important. And the fact that they don't have any physical inputs is just a huge blind spot. Like, maybe we can make robot bodies and teach them space and time and color and texture and emotion, but I don't see any plans for us to do that. So until we do, very skeptical. um, but I am, like, we always have to think about what might be possible if there's a new technical breakthrough. Maybe someone does invent something that's akin to the transformer where we make some huge jumping capabilities. But at the moment, I'm not seeing it. But I'm, what do I know? I don't work for DeepMind. I don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, the treating it as an oracle is a problem. So just before this talk, I was at the school district, and I presented my perspective on AI to 90 teachers, all line teachers. Like they left the meeting and went to teach immediately afterwards. They weren't like school board members, and they're afraid. And I think they're afraid because they don't understand the thing. So I explained the thing, and they're like, "Oh, well, now I am both less afraid and also more afraid." Because, like, now I get it, but like also we're just talking to a dice roll at this point. And one of the recommendations that I made, although I didn't phrase it as nicely as you did, like treat it as a partner, a writing partner rather than Oracle, was they said kids are going and they're writing entire essays on Abe Lincoln. And we did a prompt exercise where I told ChatGPT 4, do not write this for me. We explicitly came out of it, said, I want to talk to you about organizing my thoughts about my article. I have to write a thing about Abe Lincoln. Do not write it for me. And I tried to take it off topic. I tried to have it talk about other stuff. It kept bringing me, hey, let's get back into Abe Lincoln. Let's not talk about anime right now. let's focus on, how anime relates to Abe Lincoln or whatever. And it was such a fun way to tell it explicitly not to do the thing. And some of the teachers thought that they might use that technique to actually say, all right, kids, we know you're using ChatGPT. Here's the prompt we want you to use. And then it became like, okay, this is a tutor that can help these kids get better. And it'll be with them patient when I'm not there to sit with them.
Yeah. Actually, I just seen. I'm really interested in this and how it applies to education. I haven't researched this extensively. I know there are people whose whole lives right now is just thinking about this problem.
Mhm.
And my mother's a teacher, so I hear a lot about it. How they're tackling it in her school, like moving back to oral exams, right? Trying to get teachers to integrate it into their lesson plans and use like various models, not just ChatGPT, but teaching them about there are these different models and different companies. And let's talk
Mm.
about the motivations behind why people are building these things. Like really try to give them a holistic understanding of what language models are, which is, I think, the best thing you could do for a young kid at the moment. But I had seen even that here in the UK, a school has launched a program to have, I think it's just for the first 2 years of high school, we had like GCSE exam splits that people do. They're having a cohort of kids go through with mostly an AI tutor leading them through the program. They'll have like human, I guess, support people, but for the most part, they're trying to test whether an AI system can adjust to each kid's learning level and where they are. So they're all working through the same curriculum, but it's adapting. It's the way it's teaching and what content it's giving them at what time to each kid's level, which I'm a little skeptical that it would like really be as good as teachers. But I'm also like, wow, if that could work and everyone gets a more personalized education that's like suited to their pace of things, maybe it's actually pretty promising.
It sounds interesting. I mean, it's certainly scary to be practicing that on anyone, but I think that the issue is the lack of long-term memory.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
it's a new, fresh person every time I wake up in the morning and ask it a question. So unless you're keeping track and truly adjusting on a day by day and a year by year basis, they're going to end up talking to the same mirror every day.
Yes, yeah. And I was reading the whole pitch on this like AI tutor thing. And I went, I hope you're a really sophisticated architecture built around this where you've just got databases you're saving things to and doing really clever RAG tricks to pull back the data at the right time. So that was where I was like, I doubt capabilities are good enough to do this at the moment, but it's a nice future idea.
Yeah, you say clever rag tricks, but I'm starting to see and realize in my own usage of AI that the recency bias is such a problem that I'm
Yeah.
leading it down the primrose path, and it's giving me answers because it feels like it's almost like it knows I want the answer, so it's trying to get me there, but it's like it's not willing to challenge me
Oh,
if
yeah.
it's not grounded. So it'll just go with whatever bias that I have and head in that direction. It's a really eager improv partner that's willing to say yes and to anything.
Right. Yeah, that's true. It's not very good at being critical. I've been trying to build, I've been trying to think about them as ways to like embed certain kinds of thinking into a tool that could guide you through a process. So I'm at the moment I'm trying to build a prototype where there's like a certain kind of advisor I want when I'm writing an essay. It would be like a critical college advisor, like usually a professor who you would give them your essay and they would rip it apart. They would also say, okay, you're trying to talk about these themes here. You really need to make sure you've read so and so's work. Well, like if you're reading so and so's work, you need to know that they were influenced by this person. Like that is the really valuable thing about good teachers and professors is they have all the domain context and then they can ask really good critical, like you've also, this isn't a convincing point and like you've failed to support this with evidence, that kind of feedback. I don't expect, so this prototype I'm building is trying to recreate that. It's trying to get it to be a really critical reader of things I've written and to suggest holes in my knowledge or holes in the domain that I'm working in. But I'm trying to like guide it very narrowly to do that. So I'm sort of saying, okay, I need you to like identify every single claim I've made in this piece of writing. Okay, now I want you to check whether I've given evidence for every single one of those claims. So I'm giving it, in fact, a very limited set of things it can do. I'm not just being like, okay, one prompt to the model and like see what it says, because I expect it will just say, those are great ideas, go ahead and publish it or something.
Yeah.
I'm trying to instead ask it to just do very narrow, specific tasks based on a critical framework that I'm coming up with.
It feels like that's right on the edge of what we're able to do without including agents. Like that's asking a lot of a model on its own to do. and I've been saying this declaratively when I give these presentations, is it cannot reason. Like
Yeah.
I think we just all need to accept that GPT is an interesting and a powerful architecture, but it doesn't reason. And there's a lot of argument. Like people seem split on that simple statement. Oh, I think it does reason. And like it makes me wonder. Then wait a second. If it's just rolling a d20 to get to the next word, am I also doing the same?
Right.
Do I reason or do I just like guess the next word?
Yeah, like philosophy has never been so relevant to the programming community as with language models, because this just feels like an endless debate. I feel like there's every other week some paper on archive of people trying to prove that models do or don't reason by, conducting some experiment where they get it to like design a board game or extrapolate from the rules of something. And then no one can agree on what reasoning is. We never agreed on it in the first place.
Yeah, I gave a talk about AI, and I used the analogy that I've been married to my wife now for 25 years, and we finish each other's sandwiches, and like you just don't know what the next word is, but she does because she's got 25 years of context. So now I'm starting to wonder: am I a good husband, or am I just the statistical model of the most likely next thing Hanselman's going to say? People are listening to this show and they're like, it's classic Hanselman. That's exactly what he would say, because they've listened to enough episodes that they know that I'm just predictable, which is not a good thing.
Right. But I think if we replaced you with a model that like always predicted the correct next word that you would have said based on all your previous records, I mean, I just can't imagine that being as compelling. It gets back to the humanity thing. It matters that you're an actual living being with like dynamic thoughts and complex opinions and a whole physical, emotional life outside of the words you say on a podcast.
Yeah. What do you think about that term? I think it was Timnit Gebru and her friends that said stochastic parrot. Like it's a parrot. And parrots are great. And it's crazy when parrots talk, but the parrot is not as smart as you are giving it credit for.
Yeah. I know that was such a controversial is the word I'm looking for phrase. I feel like people reacted so strongly to that because even I thought it was a great line, stochastic parrot, and that it does sort of represent what's happening. But then I feel like it also tries to simplify it in a way that makes it difficult to reason about the capabilities of models, because even when we think of like, oh, all it's doing is predicting the next word, we would imagine that's not a very capable machine. But then it turns out it is quite capable in all these interesting ways if you're clever about the design and the architecture and like the UX around it and finding interesting ways to use next word completion to like apply to real tasks. Because I don't think anyone would say, okay, if you can predict the next word in a sentence, you'll be able to like, build everything that we've built so far with it. It's, yeah.
Yeah, that is the part that's hard, is that people want to, and I'm the worst of them, people want to simplify things and come up with analogies and say just. I talk about this a lot on the show. Oh, it's just whatever. Okay, so you're just taking the work of 50 years of machine learning and data science and statistics and math, and you're putting it into a phrase. And stochastic parrot is like two solid words that are taking thousands of pages of people's PhD theses and saying, oh, it's just a stochastic parrot. That's very minimizing.
Yeah, very minimizing. I know, because then we just wouldn't predict that it would be capable at all, and then we underestimate it. But we're in this. I feel like we're in this like I don't know how to quite describe it, but sometimes we're being like capabilities gaslighting is kind of what's happening. That's what phrases sometimes used in talks, because it's like we both are looking at it and going, okay, it looks like it's not actually that capable. It's just a stochastic parrot. But also, it seems like it's incredibly capable and can like pass the GRE at the 99th percentile. So like, what in the world is going on here? And like, no one can figure it out. We're just sort of being gaslit by it.
Yeah. It's difficult because they say any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And like I could say, oh yeah, well, this computer that you and I are talking on right now is just a rock that we infused with lightning. And it's really, but it's complicated. I love that you're talking about these complicated things and that you have long form. And I'm shocked that there's long form material that you have in drafts. Post your drafts, Maggie. I want to read this article that you never published.
I know. I wish I had. I knew at the time I had only gotten it into the language model world a few months previously, which often is like you have perfect beginner's mind. You can kind of see things fresh that other people can't see. But I was so insecure because I was meeting all these people who had been working in it for years, and these PhDs and people working at OpenAI. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I cannot publicly say anything about language models. I know nothing. And now 3 years down the line, I'm like, oh my gosh, I knew so much.
Well, I'm glad that you got to spend time with us today, and I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
You can learn more about Maggie Appleton and her work at maggieappleton.com. Check out her blog and her long-form writings. And this has been another episode of Hansel Minutes, and we'll see you again next week.